Right, so I didn't think of filming an intro before doing this experiment, so let's just pretend that this dried out jar is actually the ones you're about to see. So I have two completely dried out jars. They used to house aquatic ecosystems, but a few years back I unintentionally let them dry out completely. And now I want to see what will happen if I add water to these ecosystems again. Will dormant eggs or cysts of small critters awaken and repopulate the ecosystem, or will maybe a new ecosystem form altogether? Let's find out, shall we? So, this is the first and smaller dried out jar. I don't have any footage of it not being dry, but it's a jar that was filled with pond water and substrate and all kinds of critters, in which I grew aquarium plants I had left over after trimming. All the horizontal stripes on the glass are evaporation lines, because the water didn't evaporate evenly over time. It's been completely dry for 2 or 3 years now. The substrate still looks quite pretty. All those colors come from different bacterial colonies, which have now also dried out. This larger jar I have shown before. I put some small crustaceans like ostracods and copepods in there, just in tap water at first. Then I started adding trimmings of aquarium plants and cherry shrimp. It even had mosquito larvae at some point. Oh yeah, and a whole bunch of snails. The dried algae looks really interesting. Alright, let's fill them up. I'm just using untreated tap water for this, which in the Netherlands is actually really pure. I also use it for my aquariums. There's no need to treat it in any way. As is to be expected, there's a lot of bubbles coming out of the substrate. Interestingly, in this jar, all the dry stuff immediately started floating. All these little dots are tiny ostracod shells. A lot of them used to live in here. A day later, the large jar has a slight yellowish tint to the water, which is a bit more noticeable in real life than on camera. I think it's probably due to chloroplasts leaking from dead algae cells. Other than that, not much has happened, obviously. Let's, take a bit of a closer look. For the small jar, I'm taking a sample from near the substrate. At 63 times magnification we see some sand, which isn't shocking, but at 400 times magnification we can actually see some evidence of bacterial life. The dots actively moving around and not just jiggling about are bacteria. They must have emerged from cysts as soon as the water was added. How cool! In the big jar I took a sample from near the dried algae mat. Apart from the skeletal remains of this unidentified microbe and these diatoms, some dried algae, and what I think is a piece of crustacean exoskeleton, there wasn't much to see. Definitely not something alive. 2 days later, both jars started to get a little bit cloudy, and the dried substrate sank to the bottom in the large jar. Another 6 days later, 9 days after they were filled, the jars had gotten a bit more cloudy, but no life could be seen with the naked eye yet, or so I thought. Until I saw this biofilm. Let's, take a bit of a closer look. Here we can see that the biofilm consists of a dense soup of bacteria. There's also other microbes living on this biofilm, different ciliates and flagellates. It's quite busy in here. While taking a sample from the substrate, my hand got covered in biofilm, which looked a little bit funky and didn't smell great. Okay, so that was kinda nasty. Doesn't smell fantastic. Unlike a week earlier, there were now all kinds of microbes visible between the grains of sand. The larger jar also had a biofilm forming on top, but way less thick. I'm not sure if I was able to get an actual piece of the biofilm or just water around it, but we can see a lot of bacteria swimming around. And here we have a microbe that seems to be stuck. This biofilm is less dense and less smelly than the biofilm from the smaller jar. Apart from bacteria, I'm also seeing quite a lot of these dark balls with a single flagellum sticking out one side of them. So far we've seen microbes emerge more quickly and more diversely in the small jar, which I think might be due to the large substrate layer, providing a lot of space for cysts and organic matter. I want to try this little trick I learned where if you take a cover glass like this, used for microscopy, and with the help of the surface tension of the water, you let it rest on top of the water surface. Let's see, like that. I'll show you a close-up in this. What actually happens is that if any biofilm is to form, then it forms on the cover glass, or in a way you get sort of like a tiny microbe city living on your cover glass if you keep it in there for a week, a month, whatever. And if you then take the cover glass and view it under the microscope, you see a lot more than if you just sample the water. Hopefully they'll keep floating. Another 6 days later, about 2 weeks after the start of the experiment, the big jar looked very similar, but the water in the smaller jar had turned really dark and the biofilm on top had gotten really thick. Why don't we, take a bit of a closer look at the biofilm? Look, the cover glass left a perfectly square hole in the biofilm. Neato! This biofilm is really thick because it's composed of a lot of bacteria. Pretty much every single little black speck you're seeing is a bacteria. But it doesn't end there, no, because all of these strings, or hair-like structures, are stringed colonies of bacteria as well. This little microbe really is all over the place. Here we have another colony. These might actually be algae though. The microbe in the middle there seems to be a lacrimaria, which happens to be stuck and has kind of a weird body shape. Maybe it's dividing? Well, this time the sample from the big jar tells a different story. Look at all those little beasts. Here we have a large ciliate. Here you get a sense of how many there are. I think these tiny microbes are the ones responsible for turning the water yellow, or at least for the green color of the biofilm. I also think that these tiny microbes are Cryptomonas, single-celled flagellate algae. And here we have yet another microbe, a fast one. Yay! 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 Let's take an open water sample to see why the water is so dark. It might be because there's a lot of bacteria present in the water. All the dots in the sample are bacteria. But a lot of bacteria in the water usually results in very cloudy water, not really in black water. It could also be that the substrate is leaking colorants in the water of some kind. Let's take another near sediment sample. Here we see a linear bacterial colony and a diatom. And yeah, a lot more tiny microbes, but let's move on. Let's also take an open water sample from the big jar. Unfortunately, you don't see this nearly as well on camera as in real life, but somehow, and I hope you can see this, there's a very intricate bacterial grid in this sample. All those little black dots are bacteria. I think it looks really pretty. All those little microbes zooming around are, once again, Cryptomonas. I think, once again. It's getting quite busy in here. Look at what I'm going through for you guys. I'm not going crazy, you are! Let's return this cover glass to the water surface. This isn't going to work. Oh no! Let's hope this one works. Yes! And I'll add a new one to this jar. Another week later, the water in the small jar turned really dark, almost completely black. Another 5 days later, a month since the start of the experiment, some of the water had evaporated, revealing that the biofilm was actually quite green. Time to fill it back up, carefully, without letting the cover glass fall in. The cover glass of the big jar disappeared for some reason, so no need to be careful there. One day later, the water in the small jar suddenly turned lighter again. Somehow adding a bit of water and stirring up the water column allowed it to clear up a bit. In the large jar, a new algae mat is starting to form on the bottom, and there's also a biofilm and/or algae growing on the sides of the jar. Let's take one last bit of a closer look for this episode at this jar. Look at these pretty ciliates. And all those algae. And one last deep water sample. Uh-oh. Side note, I've got stuff on my hand again, but it's not as slimy and it doesn't smell nearly as bad as last time. So that means... yeah, I don't know really. I guess it's more healthy or something. I don't know, but interesting, right? Yeah, it's a bit more of the same, only less. Alright, one more cheeky look at this biofilm / algae mat. I'm gonna need 2 hands for this. Wow, look at that! Look! It's really green! Haha, that's awesome, dude! Let's not spill over this time. And let's take a look at this algae mat. This is an ostracoid shell with some Cryptomonas around it. Here we have some more, but different single-celled algae. Right, well, I think that's about all I have for you for this video about the resurrection of the dried ecospheres, adding water to them and seeing what happens. So far, I think the experiment has been very interesting. We've seen a lot of color changes, for instance, but also a lot of microbes and algae starting to grow. Um, I was, of course, kind of hoping that we would see small crustaceans popping up again from dormant eggs or cysts. That hasn't happened, at least not yet. Maybe it will sometime. Um, but I still think this is a very interesting experiment, and I will keep you posted, of course, with new updates. Meaning that if you don't want to miss those updates, and you haven't already, well, you're going to have to subscribe. Bye bye, goodbye.